dealing with extremely temperature-sensitive work equipment, or maybe you're near a forge where the intake would be inundated with extremely hot air. Ha! Gosh dang forge. This way you can more easily duct the cooling and potentially operate entirely passively. Oh, and one neat little feature is this AT mode jumper. It's not in the manual, but what it does is makes it so the PC stays on as long as the power button is active. So you can have a hard switch like you'd see on a power supply with on or off. Again, more of an industrial thing, but chunky switches are super satisfying, so I like it.
Okay, that is a niche use case. Well, how about something that you might have actually seen before without realizing it? This bad boy right here is the Shenzhen Zeal All ZASK1050. And it has both a regular CPU socket and a GeForce GTX 1050 Ti built into it. Why? Well, it's actually billed as a TV motherboard, which seems like a poorly translated way of saying digital signage. And that seems about right. Not only do we have that 1050 Ti, which is much more capable of 3D acceleration than Intel onboard graphics, but there are twin LVDS headers on the motherboard, both capable of driving a 1080p display. And in fact, the I/O on this thing is spread around in a very unusual way. Both the left and right edges of the board are absolutely brimming with ports. So if we assume that the CPU is on top, then on the right, we've got a 19-volt power connector, HDMI, gigabit Ethernet, USB 3.0, SATA, and audio. But wait a second, some of these are internal connectors. What's up with SATA? And what's this little weird SATA labeled block next to it? Ah, yes. These are cool, right? These SATA power connectors are common on a lot of embedded motherboards because they take external power. That means that, kind of like the ATX 12-volt only standard that Intel's been pushing, this motherboard is responsible for handling all peripheral power, usually using an adapter that plugs in as a single block into the back of your drive, like this one. Around the other side, we've got what looks like an HDMI port, but is actually an LPC bus port for debugging. Not entirely sure how you'd use it, but it's nice that it's there. And then next to that are SATA power and data ports, those LVDS connectors, a USB 3 front panel connector, standard that Intel's been pushing, inverter connector, this motherboard is responsible for handling all peripheral power, usually using an adapter that plugs in as a single block into the back of your drive, like this one. USB 2 header. To say that this is non-standard would be like saying Linus drops things sometimes. Wait a minute, was this written with Alex in mind? Okay, you know what, whatever. It's seriously weird. Presumably the idea is that this would mount to a box in the back of a digital sign and then break out into all the connectors that it needs from there. And the 1050 Ti is in there to make sure that it's got enough power to drive whatever animations that you're gonna run on the displays. Aside from that, there's not much else going on with this other than the distinct lack of expansion slots, other than an M.2 SATA 2240 port and an M.2 2220 slot that's marked for Wi-Fi. RAM is handled by DDR4 SODIMMs, and you thankfully get 2 slots stacked on top of each other to play with, similar to how a thicker laptop might keep a low profile.
Boring!
Okay, fair enough. Enough with the industrial boards. Let's talk about something a little bit more practical. This little number from PC Win Max. Well, it's pretty normal looking right out of the gate here. You've got a PCI Express 16X slot, a 1X slot, 2 DDR3 RAM slots, SATA ports, a really poorly placed USB 3.0 header, and even fairly normal rear I/O. PS2, HDMI, VGA, 4 USB ports, and gigabit Ethernet. Wait, are you sure this is a weird board? I mean, have you guys noticed what makes it weird yet? Ah yes, it's the socket. What is that? That is PGA 989, and what uses it is mobile 2nd and 3rd gen Intel Core Series CPUs. Yep, we're looking at a desktop board that was made for mobile CPUs that first launched back in 2011. So you might look at this and say, well, that's gotta be some kind of ancient relic of the past. But if this date code on it is anything to go by, it was actually manufactured on Christmas Day in 2018. What gives? Well, remember back at Computex 2019 when we started seeing new X79 motherboards for Ivy Bridge E high-end desktop CPUs? This just so happens to coincide with that. And my best guess is that these components were being recycled at around that time and found their way over to China, where still good components were repurposed to become low-cost options for PC builds. It makes sense. I mean, you might have thrown out that old laptop with a busted screen and a battery that looks like it ate too much at the buffet, but the components on the main board were probably still totally fine. And we saw something very similar recently, actually, with Haswell mobile CPUs being transplanted into desktop CPU form factors. This kind of upcycling, honestly, is kind of awesome, and I wish that it happened more often. Unfortunately, finding a CPU to match a board like this is a little tough. By 3rd gen, most CPUs were being soldered directly to the motherboard using ball grid arrays rather than pin grid array sockets. And the only one that I know for sure uses pins is the Core i7-3920XM, which goes for around $130 to $150 on eBay. Worth it? Considering that I'm not even sure they're selling these boards anymore, probably not. But why don't we take a look at what was in the other PC Win Max box? Okay, this is a really weird board. It says it's ITX, but it's clearly much smaller than that. I mean, I can hold it in one hand. The model number says EPIC M37, which really doesn't help any. You certainly won't be installing an EPIC server CPU on this thing. So from what I can tell, it's a similar concept to the other PC Win Max motherboard, but a little more integrated. Because as you can see, if we flip it around, yes, our CPU is now soldered, and then we've got an additional chipset on here that, according to the marking, seems to suggest it is an HM65. So this is an earlier Sandy Bridge era board with a single DDR3 SODIMM on the front and 2 mini PCIe slots. One of those is probably SATA only, given that the age of this chipset means you wouldn't be able to boot from an NVMe drive even if you had a compatible SSD. Oh yeah, speaking of chipsets, get subscribed because we're going to find out once and for all if you really get more performance out of a high-end chipset motherboard. I/O on this puppy is pretty limited, just 4 USB ports, gigabit Ethernet, VGA, and HDMI. Input power is actually kind of an unknown here. It just says DC Jack 1. So just start trying things, starting with 12 volt and hope you don't fry it. I mean, it can't require that much juice. All it's got on it is CPU, 1 stick of RAM, maybe a couple mini PCIe devices, Ethernet, and USB. Okay, technically there's SATA power on here as well, but that kind of goes against the spirit of building with something this tiny. Surely you're not gonna put a big old hard drive in it. This one is so tiny that there's not much else to say about it. The one additional feature that would make it interesting is a serial port, and unfortunately, there isn't one on here, so it's really just a tiny PC. And your guess is as good as mine as to how exactly the cooler is supposed to mount to it. There's no mounting points for one, not even for the chipset. Maybe whatever CPU this is doesn't need one? Yeah, no, that's definitely not right. This was but a small taste of what's out there, guys. We had at least 3 more that we wanted to get in for this video that just never arrived, like this X79 motherboard with only 2 RAM slots. So let us know of some of the weirder motherboards that you've seen, and maybe we'll circle back and take another shot at this, because there is no shortage of them out there. Just like there's no shortage of segues to our sponsor, Manscaped. Manscaped provides an all-in-one grooming kit that has you covered from head to toe. Their Performance Package 4.0 features their awesome Lawnmower 4.0 waterproof body trimmer, their Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, plus a whole lot of other goodies. For a limited time, you'll get all of this plus 2 free gifts, the Shed travel bag and Manscaped's anti-chafing boxer briefs. So don't wait, visit manscaped.com/tech or click the link down below for 20% off and free shipping. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this look at some weird-ass motherboards, maybe go check out our previous video looking at some weird-ass GPUs. They were very weird. Welcome, guys. We've got a fun little stream for y'all today. It's sponsored by MSI, and we're going to be putting together a reasonably priced gaming system. And you might think to yourself, gee, Linus, that's not really something you guys do very often. And I'd say, you're right. But that's okay, because there's a first time for everything. Actually, we do it once in a while, and it seems like a really good time to address the $1,000 price point. Now, going back even to my days as a sales representative at the computer store, I would always tell customers when they came in, whether they came in wanting a $600 computer or a $2,000 computer, I would almost always try to not necessarily sell everybody the same computer, but kind of tug them a little bit towards that bang for the buck sweet spot, which for the last, I don't know, as long as Jake's been alive anyway, has been about $1,000 to $1,500. So this right here is a $1,010 US dollar. Long story, we changed out the power supply. This one's $10 more, it's all good. So it's a $1,010 US build, and it's gonna be great for everything from gaming to light streaming, photo editing, light video editing, actually like pretty medium heavy video editing, 16 gigs of RAM. Yeah, that's not too bad. Let's get it started, shall we? And again, like I said, it's sponsored by MSI, so of course, at the heart of our system is the MSI B460 Tomahawk. Let's go ahead and fire this puppy up. Ooh. You know, I gotta say, this is a massive change that has taken place over the last, I remember it was probably right around the time, I guess, that I stopped working retail. Because it used to be that if someone was like, "Oh yeah, I'm building a gaming system and I'm gonna use a B series chipset," you'd kind of be like, "I says, pardon? Why are you using a B series chipset on a gaming rig?" Because I don't know if you guys will remember this. Some of you, like Jake, might be too young to remember this. You're leaving. You're not gonna monitor the stream anymore. Jake, please come back. Please forgive me. He's actually leaving. Are you actually leaving? Look, he's not monitoring the stream. He actually left. Okay, I mean, I guess it should be fine. Probably, but what if the audio dies or something? Anyway, so I don't know if you guys will remember this, but B used to stand for business. That's right. B series chipsets used to be like the boring, B for boring, business, boner, wait, no, not for that, definitely not for that. Boring business, boomer, boring business boomers. And nowadays, you can get B-series boards that have basically the same feature set that you'd expect to see on a high-end gaming board. So on this one in particular, we've got one PCI Express 16X slot, that's for your graphics card, multi-GPU setups, basically dead as of NVIDIA's blog post a week or two ago. Ample expansion. So remember, guys, it is a B-series board, so you don't have a ton of PCI Express lanes off the chipset in the first place. So you can't expect a full complement of PCI Express slots in addition to a bunch of M.2 slots, so you have to make some trade-offs. So you've got a couple of 1X slots, a 4X slot. This one looks like a 16X slot. I don't really get this whole approach. If anyone from MSI is watching this, and I know for a fact that people from MSI will watch this, here's a little bit of feedback for you guys free of charge. Everybody needs to start just using the sized slot that goes with the number of pins that you put in it, and then just having the open back so I can just stick a longer card in it if I want to. That's the way to do it. Don't put a 16X slot in with fewer pins, because that just takes up more room on the board for no apparent reason. So if you just had a 4X slot there and just bare space on the PCB behind it, then I could plug any card I wanted into it anyway. And you could do exactly the same thing here. Now you can actually fix this yourself. I've done it with a rotary tool like a Dremel. If you have a nice wide disc, you can get in right here and you can shave down the back of the slot. I've also done it with like a torch and a butter knife. So I would just like heat up my butter knife, be like, heat up the butter knife, get it nice and hot. And then you just kind of like melt it and then kind of pick it away with your fingernails. Just that's stupid. Why don't you just make it so I can, that's one of the beauties of PCI Express, is that upward and downward compatibility. So you can stick a big long card into a little tiny slot and a little tiny card into a big long slot. It's like, the free love interface. All right, also on here we've got, looks like two M.2 slots. I don't know why this heatsink is so big. I'm kind of tempted to pull it off. It might just be for the chipset. Yes, it is. It is just for the chipset. Where's the sponsor spot? I already told you, it's brought to you by MSI. Speaking of MSI, this video is brought to you by MSI. What do you people want from me? All right, so we've got actually a surprisingly robust VRM. Again, remember this is a B-series board. We've got USB Type-C for the front panel, as well as the more traditional USB Type-A, USB 3, ample SATA ports. Like, this is pretty much, like, look at that. They've even got the, like, separate segmented off, like, kind of daughter board on your motherboard for the onboard audio. Integrated I/O shield. It's, like, crazy. The one thing I would say that you're lacking on a B series board is PCI Express expansion, like I said before. There's just a limited number of slots they can put on there. And then, of course, USB 3. So there's only, look at that, 5 USB 3 ports on the back. One's Type-C, though, which is nice. And then they've got another, I believe this internal USB Type-C only does 1. So you got another 3 on the inside. So it's 2 Type-Cs total and then 6 Type-As. But unless you're building something pretty specialized, there's not really much reason to have more than that. And what's interesting is that if you're building something specialized, it's quite possible that even on a high-end motherboard using a more robust chipset, that you would have to add like extra cards or extra USB controllers anyway. I actually had an experience like that recently where I was setting up additional lighthouses and then additional on-body trackers for full-body tracking while streaming VR. And even though they're called Watchmen, so even though the Watchmen dongles are USB-C and don't actually require a bunch of bandwidth, like all they're taking is positional data from the trackers that you've got strapped to your body. So in spite of that, they just do not play nicely with multiple Watchmen on a single USB controller, regardless of the number of ports. So I ended up having to put an additional USB controller card into my system that actually had multiple controllers on it, and then plug each one into its own controller to get everything working flawlessly. It is working flawlessly now, which is nice, but it was just one of those little weird things where if you actually have an application like, oh, I want to, I don't know, set up like a machine vision setup or something like that, it's quite possible you'd have to get a specialized board or you'd have to add USB controllers. Anyhow, I actually saw a really cool board that has like, I think it's 20 USB 3 ports on the back and then like 4 controllers across the back of the board from some industrial computing company. Anyway, the CPU we're using for our rig today is actually a Core i5-10400. So it's not an overclockable processor, and actually there's nothing really, outwardly exceptional about it, other than just that it's a pretty solid bang for the buck, and it's sort of an under-talked about CPU in Intel's lineup here. It's been no secret for years and years now that Core i5 is a really good route to go for gamers, and as long as you're not expecting to throw like an RTX 3080 in here, I sincerely doubt that you're going to run into any kind of significant bottlenecking issues in games. Now, if I was going to want to, let's say, okay, a perfect example is actually what I'm doing at home, where I'm doing real-time, like, motion capture, and then I'm also streaming. I might want to jump up to more cores, but if I'm